Hello, and thank you for joining, everyone. I'm Galina Vinslet, Country Director for the European Union countries at the World Bank. I'm delighted today to launch a new World Bank report addressing the economic impact of the digital agenda in Europe. First, let me start with thanking our partners, Digital Europe, for the organization of today's event, as well as partners from the European Commission, the Fraunhofer Institute in Germany, the European Center for International Political Economy, the European Investment Bank for their collaboration on a firm survey covering technology uptake, the Austrian government for supporting this work, and a number of academics and other organizations that contributed to the preparation of this report. To all these individuals and organizations, a big thank you from us. This report is about Europe, but the approach and lessons are applicable widely and should catalyze engagement in the digital agenda in many areas in Europe and beyond. The report is also extremely timely. Digital transformation is happening, and what we need are frameworks to understand the new drivers of this change. Why the dynamics may be different? How are they impacting social and economic goals we care about? As this is not just about being competitive, but it is also about ensuring outcomes that are available to a wide range of firms, including new firms, small firms, and firms in less developed locations. We need to understand better what the evidence is on how digital technologies are and are not living up to their potential, and in turn, to use that evidence to inform policy choices. Today, digital transformation is the key driver of significant shift in our economies, societies, and personal lives. In the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, digital connectivity has become a public good and a prerequisite for business and operational continuity. Digital technologies are enabling more work to be done and done safely during the pandemic. Today's online meeting is just another example of this new normal. Across the region, government services, health, and education are sectors which were often disproportionately affected and disrupted by COVID-19. But these are also the sectors where digital solutions are helping ensure delivery of critical services. Digital technologies are also accelerating a broader engagement among customers in using digital tools that can translate over to a broader digital economy. This region has shown remarkable resilience in the face of the pandemic and has taken meaningful steps, paving the way for a faster economic recovery with the help of digital technology. And this is the context in which I want to highlight a few key insights of the report before turning to our distinguished panelists. The report looks at the impact of digital technologies grouped in three categories: operational, transactional, and informational. These are then assessed along three objectives: raising competitiveness on the one hand, fostering market inclusion, so new firms and smaller firms can access and use technologies, and geographic convergence, to enable firms to pursue opportunities no matter their location. So let's look in each in turn. The report finds that operational technologies such as smart robotics and 3D printing is an area in which Europe is a global leader. Europe is highly competitive in the global space in this area. Yet there are challenges in this field. Operational technologies tend to foster geographic concentration because their nature of production requires high capital expenditure and scale to achieve efficiency gains. This can make it more difficult for smaller firms to compete in this area without access to high-cost advanced technologies. Looking at the second category, transactional technologies, or platforms that help match suppliers and customers, the report notes that they have been the biggest potential to boost market inclusion and geographic convergence. They can give smaller firms access to much larger markets. The report finds also that higher use of transactional technologies companies is actually associated with significantly smaller productivity gap between larger and smaller firms. The same is true for the geographic concentration of economic activities. The availability of transactional technologies expands access for business outside business hubs. Further good news is that encouraging the use of these digital platforms can actually foster job creation. What we see in Europe is that almost 2/3 of European firms that implemented digital platforms in their businesses experienced an increase in employment growth over the past 3 years. The challenge here is that the uptake and the use of these technologies is still low, and European firms are not global leaders in providing these types of platforms. This lack of widespread adoption of transactional technologies by firms across Europe is actually a reflection of an untapped potential for growth. With respect to the third category, informational technologies, such as cloud computing and social media, the report finds that they promote market inclusion. These technologies disproportionately benefit small firms due to the low fixed cost of installation relative to hardware and the elimination of upfront capital expenditure. The challenge here is to enable the use of traditional informational technologies for fostering greater geographic convergence in Europe. This evidence and also some of the lessons that we draw in the report help inform 3 long-standing debates and also provide recommendations. First, would more champions or more markets help complete the transition to the data economy? Put differently, should policies focus on engendering the emergence of champions, or should policies take a broader approach and strengthen the complementary factors that help determine the pace and pattern of technological progress, such as skills, infrastructure, and the broader regulatory environment? Here, scaling digital markets and accelerating the transition to using them more widely may actually make it more viable for champions to emerge and thrive. The second debate relates to the regulatory choices. Can Europe's regulatory choices be a source of comparative advantage, influencing the values and standards of new technologies globally? Europe remains a global leader in shaping competition policies, addressing new features of data-driven businesses, as well as regulating data privacy protections. This is important. These regulatory choices will further shape the contestability of data markets, influencing the emergence of digital global players and affecting the extent to which small and medium enterprises, as well as new entrants, can simultaneously access data and innovate. How greater contestability and privacy by design approaches affect innovation will in turn affect both competitiveness and inclusion. Third, is leapfrogging possible, or is it more attention needed to diffuse technologies that can facilitate catching up? An outstanding debate. Here, the variation in terms of access and readiness to use digital technologies across and within countries is striking. Diffusion does not happen quickly or automatically. Therefore, speeding this process to raise productivity more widely, providing support for more firms and locations to catch up, will be critical for ensuring more people are included and to enhance convergence. In this context of these 3 debates, the report emphasizes the importance of scaling markets, shaping the commercial use of data, and speeding technology adoptions, but not slowing or stopping in embracing the technological change around us. The question before policymakers is what choices they will make in helping firms and workers to prepare, to pursue new opportunities, and to use new technologies to achieve a dynamic and inclusive Europe 4.0. In discussing policy choices available to regulators, this report lays out the possibility of embracing new technologies in ways that can contribute simultaneously to competitiveness, inclusion, and convergence. Europe has everything it takes to attain Europe 4.0, and it should take that chance. And with that, I want to turn the floor over to Mary Howard Driemeyer, lead author of the report, who can share additional insights from Europe 4.0 addressing the digital dilemma report, and her distinguished analysts. I look forward to an insightful discussion. Thank you.
Apologies, I was muted. Let me share my screen again. So I'm just going to give a couple of additional comments on the report, and then we'll introduce the rest of the panel. And again, want to join in the thanking of all the various partners that have supported this work, and it's very exciting to be at a point where we can share it more broadly. So as Galina had been discussing, we really wanted to bring a framework and then test it with the evidence to really understand what the impact is of different kinds of digital technology on the goals that Europe has in terms of competitiveness, market inclusion for small firms, for young firms, and then geographic convergence, really giving an opportunity for firms and workers across the region really to take advantage of new opportunities. And as we said, and it's evident in the title, we find at the moment this evidence of a dilemma, that the areas, and it's sort of a dilemma between the sort of objectives and performance. So where Europe is really strong in these, what we're calling operational technologies, these smart robotics and 3D printers, super competitive, and that's great. But unfortunately, it is widening these divides between firms and regions, so not contributing to all three goals simultaneously. On the other hand, the kinds of technologies that are all, hitting all three of these objectives, these digital platforms, other kinds of sort of cloud computing, etc., the competitiveness of Europe is weak. So just to sort of put this in a little bit more sort of an economics framework, is trying to understand that you can't just say digital technology, that we need to understand that there are different buckets of technology and why they might have different impacts. So as we said, the first one, what we were calling transactional, is really about taking advantage of matching supply and demand on a scale that you otherwise can't with sort of just in-person transactions. So it's being able to build two-sided or multi-sided markets that really bring a lot of different players together and give access to smaller firms to many more potential customers. So we can think of this as Amazon Marketplace or Alibaba, or Uber, Spotify, lots of different examples. But here, the more players you can bring to your platform, both suppliers and customers have the potential to benefit. So scale really is going to matter. Our second bucket is informational. And here, rather than sort of matching the supply demand per se, it's really taking advantage of data and the fact that computing power and storage is much, much cheaper and much more powerful than used to be. So its examples could be SAP or Google, Facebook, Tencent. It's really bringing enormous amounts of data together. So it's not about a physical footprint. It's really a much more digital approach. And therefore, the rules around data are going to be particularly important. And then the last one is operational. And it's here, the source of efficiency is more, unfortunately, taking advantage of the power of linking machine and data and replacing some of the labor. Although I will say that there is opportunities here, and Europe's strength in this, both with the number and size and growth of firms, that they do employ people. So it's not a complete replacement. But these, different than some of the earlier rounds of automation, is really linking the robots with data, right? So these are sort of the smart robots and the 3D printing, and offering a lot of opportunities for gains there. So as Galina was saying, we have sort of this 3x3 framework. So we've sort of distinguished these different types of technology based on their underlying economics. We have these three goals that Europe cares about. And then when we go to the data, what we find are really differences, that it's important to make these distinctions across types of technology. As she was saying, these transactional technologies They raise productivity across the size distribution. So small firms are gaining and large firms are gaining. And you're able to get small firms really to be able to access much larger markets. So if you look at sort of the difference between the productivity of large firms and small firms, that gap, which is found in most places, shrinks the more firms actually are taking advantage of these platforms. And it's the same with geographic convergence, that you have more players, more evenly sort of spaced out, smaller firms in outside major hubs being able to take advantage of this. So you see less sort of concentration, again, where these kinds of technologies have been taken up. So we're finding that those technologies really are hitting all three goals. On the informational, it's a little bit more complicated, and there's sort of a change in how some of these are evolving. So there's a bit of a time dimension on this as well. They raise competitiveness for sure. Some of the earlier rounds, more software-based, absolutely helped small firms too. You would have thought they would have done more in geography, and I think they did some, but the latest rounds really of sort of AI and machine learning are more intensive in skills and really are concentrating in existing sort of cities and higher production locations. And on the operational, these are absolutely raising productivity, but they are capital intensive. Scale really matters in a traditional sense. So they are very much concentrated in larger firms and in existing hubs. But the challenge for Europe is if that's where the sort of the impact sort of on the economics might be, when you look at the performance, it's very much tilted on the operational side. If you look at transactional or informational, if you look at sort of the global market capitalization of firms in this area, only about 5% is represented by Europe. So this is very much areas where the United States and China in the first order have been able to make far greater inroads. If you look at operational technologies, on the other hand, Europe very much is a leader, but therefore you've got this dilemma between the goals that Europe is trying to achieve and the sort of where its performance is. Just one sort of picture here to sort of say how this matters today with COVID-19. So this is looking across Europe at the ability to do different kinds of work, home-based or from afar, not having to be face-to-face. And there's two pieces that underlie this. I mean, one is the sort of the composition of firms varies in different locations. And so some just really are tilted into those sectors that tend to be more face-to-face. But there's a whole second layer of it, which is around the uptake, use, supporting infrastructure to be able to take advantage of digital solutions. And while ICT, access to sort of broadband, to phones, internet, is very widespread across virtually all of Europe, a lot of the skills, the uptake, the traditions and use of it vary enormously. And while there has been some catch-up, the differences remain still quite stark. So there's a lot still to be done to be able to close these gaps. And this makes enormous difference now when so much more activity is being done and done safely online. So I wanted just sort of to end with one last sort of slide, which we will move into with the panel discussion. If we have these different kinds of technologies, what do we see as some of the key policy recommendations? So on the transactional, the issue really underlying the ability to take advantage of this is scaling markets. That without scale, you don't bring lots of suppliers and customers together. And there still remain barriers to being able to realize the digital single market or even, frankly, the underlying single market itself. So one particular number to keep in mind, if you are trying to ship a product within your country versus across Europe, the cost difference is 3.7 times more to ship the same parcel across Europe. So this isn't because of digital, it's because of some of the logistics and national mail systems, et cetera. There's just a lot of other things, the final mile delivery that can make an enormous difference. And until those are tackled too, it's hard to take advantage of the full potential of this. In terms for informational technology, as I hinted before, a lot of this comes on the shaping, particularly approaches to competition policy, where Europe has really been a global leader, as well as on data privacy. Again, this is a core value, and the GDPR and other sort of protections really sort of sets Europe apart. And so part of the question is how to really make that trust in data a source of comparative advantage. And then secondly, to really, what does it take for more European firms to be able to grow and enter in this area and to improve the performance? And then lastly, on operational, really, the leaders are leading. That's not the issue. The question is, how can we have more firms sharing in this? And so what does it take to sort of smooth the adoption, to help more firms in more locations, different sizes of firms, really be able to take this up? And some of this can be an allocation of R&D, not just at the frontier, but on the adoption, on applied R&D to help more firms. And then really improving the links between firms to be able to help spread that and to help include smaller firms into a number of these supply chains. So this puts just a little bit more visuals on some of the key messages, but want to turn now to a very distinguished panel where, let me just stop sharing my screen. We are thrilled to have 4 different discussants with us. Unfortunately, a representative from SAP called in feeling ill, and we wish him speedy recovery. But who we have with us, we have Cecilia Bonfil-Dahl, who is the Director General of Digital Europe and a co-host of this event. So we're thrilled to have you. Digital Europe is a leading digital technology industry association with over 35,000 digital companies in Europe. Cecilia is also on multiple boards and task force, so very adept and an expert in being able to convert a lot of what she hears among the membership with policy and others trying to sort of understand and feedback and reflect what those needs would be. We also have Elizabeth Gruber who's the director for the Department of International Financial Institutions from the Austrian Federal Ministry of Finance, who has expertise related to a number of different issues, but particularly can bring in both perspective of Austria, but having worked for multiple years with multilateral development financial institutions, some of that broader development impact as well. We have Petros Zilgavis, who is from the Commission. He's the head of unit for digital innovation and blockchain in the Digital Single Market Directorate of DG Connect. He is also the co-chair of the Commission's FinTech Task Force. And then in addition, we have Vasil Tesarev, who is the managing partner of 11 Ventures, an early stage VC fund focused on Southeast Europe. And prior to this, he himself is a co-founder of a startup, Telerik, that became a global leader at providing developer tools. So he can give both a perspective of what it takes to start a company and increasingly looking at other startups. What does it take for Europe to be a competitive and enabling environment for more firms to be able to follow in his footsteps? All right, so I am going to start first question to Elizabeth. And first, just again, a thank you for the support of Austria for this work. It's been very much appreciated. And I wanted to get your reflection on this, the framework, and this idea of a dilemma between some of the performance and the goals, whether this resonates in how you see a number of the issues, and whether you have some examples of government actions really trying to address, particularly boosting that inclusion and convergence dimension.
Thank you. Well, thank you also for your kind words. Let me also start by thanking you for organizing this event and also for the report itself. I only can recommend to read it. It's excellent reading. We looked at it over the weekend, and it has a lot of insight that merits discussion, but also gives policy recommendation. So to your first question, do I observe this dilemma? Yes, I do observe a dilemma, but also I observe that the dilemma is part of any development process in general, and is also part of a solution, so to say, as there is no way around that government and its citizens avoid to invest in digitalization. Digitalization became part of our life, and it's part of our day-to-day business, so to say. So there is no way around, actually, in order to remain competitive, to invest in digitalization. Therefore, so to say, I think there is no way around of embracing digitalization as a whole. Our lives and our economies are becoming increasingly digitized, and we simply have to accept this as a fact. Digitalization carries a lot of promises, opportunities, but also are a source of welfare, as is mentioned also in the report, of course. However, we also see that digitalization comes with some challenges and some trade-offs that also are mentioned in the report, or dilemmas, as you call it there. So what we see, and where I see dilemmas, is that we can observe a digital divide across Europe, as the data of the report have shown. But also we observe at the national level some different dynamics. For instance, different dynamic between urban and rural regions. The digital ecosystem in cities, for instance, tend to be more sophisticated, larger, and more dynamic, which creates risks in terms of undermining convergence. There is no doubt to that. Looking at the European business sector, that is often mentioned in the report too, we have to acknowledge that the foundation of the competitiveness of many European countries is a vibrant SME sector. However, the nature of several of the new technologies, especially the transaction technologies, as you call them in your report, is such that they favor the winner-takes-it-all outcomes, which leads to market concentration. This is a development that undermines, in our view, inclusiveness and convergence, and one that is potentially also harmful for innovation in our economies. So we have to overcome it to a certain point. And lastly, I'd like also to mention that coming from the Ministry of Finance, I cannot help but speaking also a little bit of taxes. Across Europe, we struggle currently to ensure a level playing field for all actors. Multinationals, and especially also digital giants, so to say, often pay very little taxes when compared to their turnover and their profits. At the same time, the competition often wipes out local and often analog firms. For somebody who comes from the Ministry of Finance, this often means reduced tax revenues, which means also less resources are available for policy and programs that could be used also to ensure that the digital transformation is indeed inclusive. So these are just a couple of points, a couple of dilemmas I do observe. If I may also like to come to your second part of the question. So what can national governments do in helping boost inclusiveness and convergence through the digital economy, and maybe also bring a couple of examples from the Austrian perspective. So first of all, I greatly believe that there is a strong role for the government to overcome these different dilemmas, to set policy action and incentives in order to provide a conducive environment to boost inclusion and convergence. So for me, of utmost importance is that the state invests in digital infrastructure that can be used by all actors and all citizens alike. In that respect, access to digital tools must be reliable and affordable, so to say, to all. Government also need to pay attention to the inclusion at the enterprise level. In that respect, it must ensure competition, allow small and medium-sized enterprises to participate in the market and avoid market dominance or excessive market power. Also, in my view, it is certainly important to note that there is no one-size-fits-all policy. For developing countries with less developed digital ecosystems and lower IT literacy, for instance, the challenges are certainly very different from those of advanced economies. The same holds true within Europe and some regions that are lagging behind. Furthermore, it also seems important that the government understands digitalization both as a cross-cutting and as a sectoral theme. Digitalization virtually affects every sector and economy and almost every aspect of life. It's therefore important to take a holistic approach to it. At the same time, it's also important to recognize that digitalization affects different sectors and different actors differently, and to take into account when designing this policy. So maybe to finish this broad question you asked me, actually, I can give you just as an example what is the Austrian government doing in that respect. I'd just like to mention that Austria is taking digitalization very seriously, and we also at the government level. To underline this, there is a really high level support in that area. Austria named, for instance, 2019 the year of digitalization. And in 2018, the Ministry of Economy was renamed as the Ministry of Digital and Economic Affairs, just to just to support this digitalization endeavor that the government is doing. So digitalization is certainly a top priority for the Austrian government. Also in Austria's government program, digitalization is mentioned 87 times in this context. So just to underline this. So the objective is certainly to increasingly find digital solutions to all the problems and dilemmas that you mentioned in that report. So what Austria in particular is doing, we try to support the economic sector with digital services, various digital services. We try to create a digitalized, friendly environment in order to foster digital innovation, as innovation is one of the key factors in that respect. And also we try to further digital development and digital services for all citizens, in particular also when government solutions and government tools are concerned. So it's a very user-centered approach in that we respect. Also, we established a couple of agencies and digital competence centers and a whole initiative called Digital Government and so on. But I stop here. I don't want to be too long on this part. I just want maybe to emphasize for us and for me, of course, also the government has a clear role to play in providing the basic infrastructure, but also to set up the environment necessary for to further digitalization. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a great sort of overview, and you've raised a number of points that I'm going to follow up with other panelists on. So I like this idea, on the one hand, looking sort of for some more holistic solutions, while recognizing that different sectors and different actors and firms are affected differently. So Cecilia, I want to turn to you. You have 35,000 different digital firms that are members. So clearly you're going to run this sort of a spectrum of different kinds of concerns and issues, but wondered if you could speak to what you see as some of the real challenges and opportunities for Europe to be more competitive. And would love sort of a two-part answer to this. So one is this concern often of whether Europe, really is carrying its weight on the global stage. What would it take for Europe to have more global sort of competitors, and why not? And then this other sort of more vibrant ecosystem of SMEs and what's really needed there. Is there a tension between these two or synergies? If you could comment on that.
So first of all, I think we've experienced in the last, I would say 3-4 years, a focus on digital that is exceptionally positive. I think we came from digital being dangerous to digital being the solution. I think the COVID crisis had really shown that this is actually a fact. And, we were discussing, platforms nearly as something bad in Europe, whereas we realized that, without the platforms, we couldn't really get the supply chain to work, and we couldn't really communicate with our populations to the speed that we needed. And neither could we actually let people work from home, students study from home. So, I mean, it's a fact of life that without these technologies, I don't think that we would see a Europe well functioning during the crisis as it is now. Then addressing the challenges, we've seen Ursula von der Leyen and Vestager and the other vice presidents really being quite visionary and bold. Now, actually putting 20% of their recovery budget, which is 750 billion euros, towards digital investment in Europe. And I would say, boy, is that needed. And this is also why we launched an investment recommendation report 2 weeks ago. And it highlights, for inspiration, around 35 different programs that we believe are key to basically up the game in Europe. And we highlight specifically 5 areas, one of them being competitiveness and growth of SMEs, and I'll return to that. Another one is more focused at what I call the basic drivers. I think you can say that the connectivity and skills are really the basic drivers. And there we still have, I would say, national educational system, which is not even true. For some countries, it's even regional or local decided. And many of the methodologies that we're using in our educational system is basically the same as when I was a child, and the world has changed a lot since then. So one of the drivers of really heavy investment that we need also to build our competitiveness is in digital skills. And I would say really getting us there are the teachers, really enabling and empowering our teachers to teach, not only teaching in a digital world, but also teaching the digital skills. The wonderful thing is about this is that not everybody needs to be a specialist in everything, because you can actually have the specialist online teaching, a classroom full of children with another teacher being the facilitator, because that teacher might have other skills, but is connected to the children, but actually introducing by digital media someone who's a specialist in teaching the digital skills. So these are two of the programs really enabling the teachers, but also getting digital skills into the schools at a very, very early stage, that I believe where we would see the biggest effect. If I had one area of investment, that would basically be skills. The other one is, of course, connectivity. We still see, I visited just before Germany closed down again. I visited a very dear old friend, and he told me he was living together with his wife, but his daughter and his grandchildren. And the grandchildren basically had to go for 40 kilometers to do their schoolwork in another house because there was no connectivity where they lived. So this is still the case, not even only in maybe the Eastern countries like we imagine, but actually also in Germany, that people cannot get connected, and neither can businesses. So as soon as we start really competing on data and processing big amounts of data, we also need connectivities, and we also need skills, because without that, the data doesn't really matter. So these are the three main drivers, I would say, that really could boost our efficiency: access to data, access to digital skills, and connectivity. And maybe taking me to the SMEs, what we do see right now is that the challenge of growing European companies is not that we have so many talented startups. Where it fails is the scaling up. And this is where, instead of focusing at, trying to put, trying to stop something that is already here, digital innovation, I really think this is where politicians should focus. They should be focusing at what are the structural problems that prevent European scale-ups of scaling to a global leadership role. And once we really answer that question, then we know where to put our focus. And I would say two things springs to mind here. One is fragmentation in Europe. I know that Austria is really a great country of, I know Margrethe Ramberg, I have seen what you've done to the country, so big, but we still have this, I am Danish, you are German, we are Austrian, we do great things, but we don't have a lot of scale-ups from Denmark selling their goods into Austria. We don't have a lot of Austrians selling into Germany. In fact, we only have 8% of our SMEs engaging in one European country apart from their own. I don't know if you call that an internal market, but in my mind, having an internal market with 8% of SMEs engaging across border, this is extremely low. And it shows that we still have serious structural problems. Another one structural problem is access to data. Data is the new oil. How do you get access to it? So with the PSI directive, the EU, decided to give access to all this gold and all this oil, but still, I meet SMEs like Radiobotics. They do AI for breast cancer research. Of course, they need a lot of pictures, radiologist picture, and I meet companies like Corti. They use voice recognition from emergency calls. They can hear how you breathe, how you speak. More or less, they can diagnose why you're calling and how urgent it is. But can they get access to data? They are struggling. So after 2 years, living out of small venture capital, trying to fight their way through a market, only giving access to, a small, very, I would say, biased amount of data in one, very homogeneous country, doesn't really give you the product that you need. So I'm very happy to see now that the European Commission is really wants to invest in these data spaces. For example, the health data space, where all the European countries put their health data into a super secure infrastructure, allowing SMEs and not only big companies actually to get access to these data. Remember, SMEs don't have 60 big lawyers, looking into the different rules of the different countries, and therefore it's more difficult for them. And this equal access to data is another one of these investment areas that we really point out. But this was a long talk, but these are definitely some of the areas that I would point out that we need to enhance.
Great, thank you very much. All right, so Vasil, this is your opportunity. Right, so Cecilia is saying the big issue is the failure to be able to scale up. So both with your sort of founder hat and VC hat, very curious to hear what you think the challenges are on being able to scale up in Europe and what could be done about it.
Sure, I've spent quite some time thinking about that. Why is it so hard for European companies to really scale and become truly big and global companies, and why do they most often move to the US? And it's many of the things that my esteemed colleagues already mentioned, that in the US you have a lot more capital, it's a bigger and integrated market, there's talent that's not as available in Europe, the culture is different in terms of the level of support you can get even from people who are competitors. Thus, the trust is different and the velocity is different. And when you want to build a big company, you really want to be in a big and developed ecosystems, especially when all of the big technology companies that control the data, that are embedded in everything, are based there. And last but not least, I think the fact that US public markets are much more developed also plays a role, because ultimately that's the end goal for a company with very big ambitions. And when they reward you in a much bigger way, it cascades downstream. And what happens with private equity, what happens with growth equity, how much capital is available for the acceleration, the seed phase. And ultimately, when you have a better functioning capital market, it creates the draw and more or less drives all the other things. And the way to address it is to look at each of those points, what can be done. Some constraints we cannot overcome as easily as we'd like, such as the language, the different languages in Europe, such as the trust because of historic reasons in some regions. But there are some which we can, such as the regulation, and slowly what's in our hands, be able to come to a more homogeneous market. The distribution, which was already mentioned, and taking down the friction over there. Much has been done also in recent years on the financing side, still nowhere near to the amount of VC capital that you see in the US. Valuations are low, so that's why most companies go to the US, because if you want to build a global company, you compete with the best funded companies. If they're in the US and you have to compete with 1/3 of the purse, it's very, very complicated. What can be done is thinking of instruments which more or less drive the development and evolution of capital markets, so that there's more money available, so that there's incentive for people to touch such instruments as growth equity, private equity, so that it can flow in those innovative ecosystems across Europe. And it's important that this not be government money, but rather that it's private money, properly managed, with all the capitalist greediness embedded in it, so that we achieve maximum results and velocity. The other thing that comes to mind is really the talent, especially in commercialization roles, the ability to hire talent across Europe. from places outside of the EU where we don't have skills or we need to much quicker ramp up numbers. But I'm a big believer that if you want to change an ecosystem for the better and be truly competitive, it's all about big investments in education so that you foster whole generations of digital builders versus just digital consumers, and that those kids have the right skill set, and on top of that they have the right soft skills, and most importantly we teach them from a very young age the virtues of entrepreneurship, the benefits of that, because it comes down to also some of the cultural challenges we as Europeans face in even though it's improving, the level of risk-taking and fear of failure is not the same as in the US. There's a lot more conformity in going in a corporate job than taking the leap and starting a company. So really, if we want to change that and have people with bigger ambition, we have to start with kids so that we can see the results in 10, 15 years from now. Another thing that I've seen Europe not do as good as the US, it's really the highlighting of role models, the people who have succeeded from Europe, in Europe, telling all those great stories across. We can remember all of the capable US or Chinese entrepreneurs, but how many of the European top entrepreneurs are considered role models across Europe, not just locally in their home country. And the other two things when I think of culture is really that communities are built on values, and we have to promote some values if we want to achieve a better outcome. One is really taking like a hive intelligence concept across Europe, that wherever there is a breakthrough, we need to capture it, and we need to make it available to everyone else, locally, regionally, so that every mistake of nature becomes a systemic change, part of one big machine. And to do so, we really need to embrace something that I've seen in the Valley and which has influenced me in a big way. It's the paying it forward, and understanding that if you are successful, you more or less have not just a moral obligation, but also an indirect benefit to really support the well-being and future success of others in your home country, across Europe, from sector to sector, but really paying it forward and creating the infrastructure for others to succeed. Because once you have that, the level of trust improves, the knowledge in an ecosystem develops very, very quickly. Thus, the velocity and the adaptability really changes for the better. And last but not least, regulation and policy always help. I, coming from the entrepreneurial side, believe that it should be left more to the entrepreneurs and supported by government and policy. But there are some things such as the overall infrastructure, 5G, broadband, data, the regulations around how we can use data, and also the infrastructure such as e-government and services, because once you do that on a country level, it more or less forces the business and the citizens to digitize. And the government is always a pretty big and good customer, which creates a very good platform for many of those SMEs to really create a product, deploy it, win its first customers, create some societal value. And the last thing I wanted to mention was about opportunity, that more or less if we want to see more big, great companies in addition to all of these, we need to have a bigger pipeline. We have a bigger pipeline, we need to run more experiments. And for that, we need the money and the talent. So everything that fuels back and creates incentive for the capital to be deployed in this innovative part of the economy, and prepare the talent so that it's ready for the challenges of the future in terms of hard skills, soft skills, and just the values on which we want to base Europe 2.0 go a along the way.
Great, thank you very much. I think a lot of really interesting points, making sure there's a good pipeline of these digital builders, as well as some of the basic skills. So you've got your users, for which all of us are happily using various kinds of digital platforms, even though none of us, well, most of us would not be able to have done the underlying program to build this system. They make them quite user-friendly, which is really important. And so digital skills will matter, but a lot of them really can be quite accessible to a large number of people. But I'm gonna turn to Petra. So you've heard, the importance of the private sector, the ambition, the scale, the incentives, the financial ability to build that pipeline. But of course, recognizing that policy can always help too. So would be interested in your reflection from the Commission side on what you see as some of the really key sort of policies and initiatives to be able to grow this pipeline and to really encourage more innovation to be happening in Europe. What you see as some of the key priorities.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. And I heard a lot that I can obviously agree with on the skills, the connectivity, the talent, the access to finance. What can be done from the government side as part of the innovation triangle is that we provide, for instance, I'll give the example of blockchain, which is a technology that we work on in my unit, in my directorate. We have the knowledge, which you can say is the European Union Blockchain Observatory and Forum, a think tank collecting evidence, doing reports, studies, a recent workshop on central bank digital currencies, looking with an international scope in that workshop, for instance, with the Bank of Japan, Bank of Canada, European Central Bank. Then government action. We have a European blockchain partnership with 29 countries, all 27 EU member states, Norway and Liechtenstein, building together a European blockchain services infrastructure, deploying, not piloting use cases. And then a broader policy instrument, a regulatory sandbox is there, both for creating this infrastructure together with the member states in an area where legislation neither prohibits nor foresees this type of technological development. Then more broadly, a clear pro-innovation legal framework. So for instance, in this area, we have the markets in crypto assets, part of the digital finance package, and the pilot or market infrastructure is a more than regulatory sandbox because it will actually lift requirements in relation to market infrastructures where you don't need a centralized securities depository, and making this change. This then augmented by standardization, both at the international level and European level, to reduce barriers to entry for small and medium enterprises, to make it easier to utilize tools like innovation procurement, another thing in my unit. And then this is supplemented for all technologies, now I'm going more broadly, by the Startup Europe Enterprise Startup Europe Initiative, which is in my unit. And we have a Startup Europe standard coming up. This was foreseen in the small and medium enterprise policy communication, where we will look at things like what works best with stock options, which were employee stock options that we're very positive about, the aforementioned regulatory sandboxes, helping with investor due diligence for promising startups, best exit strategies and approaches, more than the access to finance, moving to full scale up. Another thing I agree with from the previous discussions, we have a lot of great startups. We have some very good scale ups. We do have a bunch of unicorns in Europe, but we could definitely have more. So these are some of the policy tools that we are utilizing to try to make the environment for entrepreneurship, for scaling up in particular, better and better in Europe. We have success. We say definitely it's there. A lot of great entrepreneurs out working, but we can do much better. And that is definitely the goal, utilizing some of the tools that I just mentioned.
Great, thank you very much. So I have some follow-up questions where I'm going to call on a number of you, and if you wish as well to chime in on something, please do. We've had sort of different sort of discussions around the need for access to data to enable more firms to start up. A lot of concerns around SMEs and how to have opportunities for them. And also talked about values a little bit in a different way, in part on a sharing. But obviously data privacy is one of the values that is being protected under regulations. So just, curious, one of the debates that we are trying to address in this report and that Galina framed at the beginning is this question of Europe's approach to regulating the data economy as a source of strength and trust. And just would be interested to hear, I guess, in part on the private sector, how you see this as a source of comparative advantage, or how it could be. What would it take for this to really help European firms more broadly have a sense of trust and comparative advantage? So, Vasil, I'm interested in your take, and Cecilia as well. So Cecilia, you're nodding, so I'm going to go to you first.
I didn't catch the exact question, sorry. Which one of them?
No, just sort of what is it going to take for Europe to really be able to use its approach on data privacy as a source of strength? How can that become a sort of a source of comparative advantage, that trust?
Well, I think right now the understanding of data privacy is being taken on board of the rest of the world, all over the world. Been very involved together with the Commission in discussing the data adequacy with Japan. We understand right now that the data adequacy agreement, the privacy shield with the US has just been deemed not adequate, meaning that we do still have data transfer mechanisms, but it's actually quite important to start a very good dialogue with the US on how we solve this going forward. But many other parts of the world are really interested in getting a data adequacy, meaning that they have and are taken on board similar high protection levels as Europe are and have with the GDPR. If it's a competitive advantage that the companies are from Europe, I don't think so. I mean, maybe market-wide, psychology-wise, that you are buying from European companies and Europe is GDPR and stuff like that. But right now, remember, all of the big companies are also in Europe, of course, and they are all compliant. So everybody in tech is compliant because they all have a global scope. Certainly the SMEs, of course, they have been the one that has been struggling the most with implementation of GDPR. And I don't think that any of them will say, yes, it's a great competitive advantage. I think they will say it's a big operational hassle. And it's still what's, sometimes preventing me from growth because I cannot access data. And there's a lot of different interpretations in different countries. And this is absolutely not because I'm against GDPR. I think it's the right thing to do. I think it's very timely. Can we call it a competitive advantage for SMEs? Absolutely not. I think that's a dream. I think it's something that we are dreaming of in the future, but I don't think so. It's much easier for a big multinational to implement something like this than it is for, but of course, there's a mix between doing the right things and representing high standards and, sometimes paying the bill of the implementation, right? And the rest of the world will follow. So I don't think it will be a disadvantage. And I think it can foster maybe more long-term thinking of how to do ethical AI, how to do data and AI and technology products and services for good, which of course, if we look in the environmental, Green Deal, everything that we have to solve on health, this can kind of foster a way of thinking where we innovate even stronger in these areas in Europe. But the direct link between the value and the money value, I don't think we can say that neither short or medium term.
Well, so one of the things we actually tried to sort of quantify what some of these, the costs, particularly for SMEs or for new firms, and a number of them, certainly if they're a fixed cost, they're disproportionately higher for smaller firms. So something in the order of 3,000 to 7,000 euros. So it is a cost in the grand scheme of a business. it's not an insurmountable kind of cost. But it can be, as consumers become more aware of what's at stake with the data that they share, how it can be used in ways they may or may not be expecting, particularly if you talk about health, people care, and that this value and the value for all the other kinds of ethical kinds of use that data may have, it seems to me this really could make a difference. But the question too about what does it mean for sharing, and what kind of data, what does that mean for startups? So Vasil, interested from your side, what is sort of the opportunity for new firms to really make a business case of how they can build on sort of privacy by design and being part of that ecosystem where other firms are all compliant with this? How can this sort of be translated into a real opportunity?
So first, I have to wholeheartedly agree with Cecilia. I don't think that this is giving specifically the SMEs any sort of advantage. It's just giving them gray hair. But that's where values, that's where you can check whether you are true to your values or not. Ultimately, that's the price we pay for doing the right thing. So I very much am a fan of those initiatives, despite them being a burden on startups. And the reality is that all of the non-EU companies that want to transact in Europe, they will find a way to cope with the regulation. But the bit of opportunity I see, and it's on a micro scale, is really about the companies who being closest to the place where the thought leadership on such things is done, really create the technology solutions around know your customer, AML, GDPR, etc., and are really at the forefront of providing the technology solutions for those regulations. But for the bigger part, I just believe it's doing the right thing and paying the price for that.
And maybe if I can just give a comment, I mean, I see that we agree, Vasil, and I mean, just remember, it's not that the ecosystem of trust and the use of GDPR is only imposed on European companies, right? And it is actually, I mean, today the ecosystem of technology is international. And equally, like American, Japanese, wherever they are from, they are all compliant with GDPR now. And many of them, once they have implemented the GDPR, then they are compliant in the whole world because they are in Europe in a major market and they implement it into their processes, which means it doesn't give really a competitive advantage per se. I do believe the thinking of it can be, I mean, beautiful and can span some good products, but I don't think it's not limited and like a trademark for only European companies, luckily.
No, exactly. I mean, in that sense, right, Europe has shaped global sense of values on this precisely because the European market is large. And if digital companies are wanting to do business in Europe, they have to be compliant. So you're absolutely right that it's not just sort of a domestic firms that have to be compliant. It's a standard that is being set for any global player or player wanting to do transactions with Europe that has to be compliant. So it is already, in that sense, shaping a lot of the global standards well beyond Europe. But I just wanted you to have a sort of a chance to sort of chime in terms, not necessarily just of that kind of standard. Obviously, there's a lot of issues in finance and blockchain, both in terms of standards around privacy and information and how to sort of to trade off some of those kind of issues in an area where maybe too much privacy could almost be a challenge with some of the blockchain. But just sort of curious how you see this playing out as a source of comparative advantage in Europe.
I see it more as a near future opportunity where definitely some citizens, consumers, perhaps more and more, and small and larger companies want to control, manage, share their own data themselves. I underline that this has to be in a very easy way. Data portability has to be real time. It has to be simple, especially for the individual pressing a button. And this is something that with blockchain and other technologies, decentralized AI, that we definitely see entrepreneurs in Europe, and not only Europe, in other places, definitely in places like Canada, Japan, Australia, Silicon Valley, wanting to implement. This is something that I sometimes call the law and political economy of decentralized digital ecosystems. So there's definitely possibilities here. It's not going to entirely replace, or maybe even replace a bit, the platform economy of today, but there is definitely a possibility for this individualized Web3, it's sometimes called, model of the decentralized internet and possibilities for citizens. So, I mean, we can say that the European philosophy perhaps is not move fast and break things, but move fast and make things. We want to go rapidly. You have to have disruptive innovation, but ideally the disruptive innovation isn't going to harm consumers, individuals, or societal values that we hold dear.
Excellent. I really like that, move fast and make things. I think that's great. So another sort of question that we've been discussing too is around both SMEs and inclusive opportunities, but a question about leapfrogging. So there's always this sort of hope that, you know, one model is one sort of slowly progresses and climbs a ladder. The idea if you can skip some of those steps and sort of leapfrog ahead, and what the sort of scope for that would be, what kind of, again, whether the ecosystem is really available, what kind of priorities might be needed to really be able to do that. So Elizabeth, you had talked about some of the programs in Austria. You know, a concern between some of the more sophisticated and not as sophisticated, sort of what support there might be to encourage, what sort of realism there may or may not need to be in terms of trying to help more firms to be able to move up more quickly.
Thank you. Yes, no, this is a very important discussion and topic. I mean, again, I think it's of course the government who can provide a platform to learn from each other and then to see also best practices. I mean, this is also what is currently done in Austria, and I think that is very important. I mean, this is one aspect. The other aspect, of course, is that it's easier probably to do some leapfrogging in an environment, in an economy that already has very advanced technological skills and IT skills, so to say. So that is certainly easier probably than in an economy that is not that advanced. But of course, there are all kinds of subsidies, of investments, of learning tools, of platforms, learning exchange programs that can be handled and should be provided by the government to that extent.
So Vasile, you're saying in your work you're focusing a lot on Southeast Europe. So on the one hand, you actually do have some very skilled programmers, people with a lot of high-tech skills, some of whom stay at home, some move elsewhere in Europe to do their programming, etc. But just sort of curious what you see as opportunities there, because if you look on average, the rates of take-up are particularly low in Southeast Europe, but whether you see opportunities there for really innovative firms, some chance for them to leapfrog, or do you really see chances for breakthroughs happening in more of a sort of existing production, so production hubs? So what you see as the scope for some more leapfrogging potential or not?
One of the interesting things that you can see is that in some countries like Bulgaria, perhaps the data might be just a little bit misleading, because while there might be some low numbers in terms of digitization, public digital services, etc., there is a very vibrant and growing technology ecosystem. but it's largely focused on outside markets. It's either big offices of R&D offices of companies like VMware, SAP, etc., or it's young startup, scale-up companies who are primarily focused on external markets. So that's where you really see the big divide. But in terms of the ability to build something meaningful, you have much better potential these days in Bulgaria, in Romania, in Greece, in pretty much all the adjacent markets. Wonderful companies being built, wonderful entrepreneurs, and many people deciding not just to stay, but also coming back. So really, it's creating this decentralized opportunity that we want to see, and which we, for example, as Bulgarians, hope to see decentralized within Bulgaria, from Sofia to Plovdiv to Varna, and it's all driven by people. Ultimately, as much policy as we decide to put, it always starts with one person who came back to their home country, their home, and decided that it can be done from there. Found the people, started building things of an ecosystem, getting all the players together, building the national and beyond national border integration, and creating more and more opportunity. And luckily, we have many stories like that. So I just want to reiterate, it's a personal choice. And that's something that when we think about all those local strategies and policies, we forget it's really about people, about those local heroes who really everyone's support to really thrive and create the opportunity.
Great. No, it's great to hear that and hear the vote of confidence on the importance of people, and that the people, in fact, are there. So that's very good to hear. Cecilia, sort of a question for you, because one of the other sort of questions is the links between firms. And what you see there, you've got obviously lots of members, you're an industry association yourself. What more can be done to really try and strengthen some of the linkages between firms to help some smaller firms get access to these larger markets, to larger firms, and be able to get brought up that way? Oh, sorry, you're still on mute.
Okay, sorry. If you see some of the very successful scale-ups, like Celonis and other scale-ups, they are basically based on, for example, here in this case, on SAP, right? So they are building on top of the applications of SAP, and has become a huge unicorn, one of Europe's huge unicorns. And of course, fostering these kind of clusters of knowledge in manufacturing, in tech, in health is absolutely crucial. And I'm sure that Peteris can tell us more about the digital hubs that are being fostered in Europe. I do think it needs to be kind of led very much from industry themselves. I don't think we can outsource our responsibility to do good business to the public administrations. But I do think the help is still needed, right? But we also have to be very critical. I mean, are those hubs really bringing benefit? Are they really focused at giving the companies the drivers, so the access to data, the access to connectivity, are the companies actually scaling globally, or are they taking too long? So I think even though we have a lot of money to invest now, we still have to be super critical. So I think we're doing the right thing. I think we need to be kind of tough on ourselves in Europe also, in business-wise, also to accept the responsibility that the only responsibility of doing good business is basically with the businesses. And then, of course, the public sector needs to create a non-fragmented regulatory environment and, making it easier, for example, to start a company. Right now, if you have to trade another company, you need to go to the administration, and it's super difficult, and then you have to right? So how can we basically make sure that the public administration processes, the tax systems across border, are really becoming much more easy for the SMEs to handle? Because it's unfair, right? It's unfair if you are 50 people and you want to go into Germany, or you want to go to France. I mean, you need to be in a niche, and you need to somehow know your way around. If not, it's just not going to happen. So how can the European countries really align their business services across country, here under also tax. So we make sure that we can basically have both transparency, but more of all, ease of business in across Europe.
Very good. All right. So, Petters, do you want to sort of chime in a little bit on the digital hubs and support to innovation that way?
Glad to. I mean, the digital hubs are the part of our policy that's intended to help SMEs, the extremely strong SME sector in Europe, to digitize. We have the startups, which are a little bit digital from day one and aiming at least to be scale-ups, and they need perhaps assistance and access to funding that we were discussing. But a lot of our SMEs are world beaters at a niche or at a service that they offer, or are offering just a great local service, baking excellent bread, providing a very nice service. But especially in the time of COVID, but in general, in order to be competitive in tomorrow's economy, they need some assistance in digitalizing. So this is the area of the digital innovation hubs, which are intended to be close to the SMEs, close to the ground, have the access on tap to both the big companies and the very innovative digital SME startups that can offer a technology, and then the SMEs coming with what they need. I want to market across Europe, or I want to market globally, or I just want to have a more efficient, modern manufacturing 4.0 even process of producing. And in this way, we match these capabilities with the needs in Europe. As was said, Europe has some excellent capabilities in a lot of areas. There are a lot of needs, as there is in the economy in general worldwide. And with this approach, we hope to produce real results. And it was mentioned that there will be a critical eye on them. And this is definitely welcome. Constructive criticism is always helpful. We're there to serve the private sector of the economy. We're there to serve the citizens. So if you see things that the digital innovation hubs or Startup Europe or the European Blockchain Partnership or the regulatory sandboxes can do better, we're happy to hear about that.
Excellent. All right. So I'm going to ask one last question of each of you, which is, we've made the link on the importance of this agenda more broadly. But it is the time of COVID, and we are seeing the importance of a lot of these digital solutions. So an urgency on really expanding this potential and helping to realize where there can be opportunities for more, not to have an exacerbated sort of digital divide. So if you had to think of sort of one thing that really was critical right now to be able to realize more of this potential, what would that be? So I'll give you just a few seconds to really think about one thing that you really want to emphasize and put on the table as being really critical. All right, so Elizabeth, I'm going to go down the same order. So what would your one thing that you think is the priority to address right now?
I think it would be strong broadband access. So you need a reliable internet in system that can be accessed by many people, but it needs to be reliable and fast, and that's the most important things in order to live the potential of digitalization.
Okay, and then Cecilia. Oh, you're on mute again. We're not hearing you.
The next one.
Oh, no, you're on again.
Okay. Sorry. So, sorry, the question again, sorry.
So in this time of COVID and urgency, if you had one thing that really needed to be addressed right now, what would you say it is?
I would say I only have one thing. Can I have two things? The building of the data space and the access to health data and creating the trust so we can basically track pandemic and start really doing a good job on tracking of COVID, but also on other diseases. would be one thing. The other thing would be getting our teachers up to speed on how to teach our youngsters into the future skills, but also basically right now just teaching them online, no matter where they are. For the Danes, it's easier, but I think we have other countries in Europe that are really struggling, and people, are losing out on years of education, which I think is absolutely horrendous too. And I don't think we've seen the effects yet.
Yes, parents and families across the world hear that. Vasil, what would your one priority be?
One would be to echo what Cecilia said on education and how to really provide excellent education via the new means without sacrificing the quality, because I see kids suffering for now. The other one is integration between the different countries, the different stakeholders, the different communities, so that they can more actively learn from each other, leverage the best practices, and put that to use in their respective fields.
Great. Okay, and Peteris, what do you see as the number one priority at this particular moment?
Well, agreeing with the emphasis on education and just throwing the net a little bit more broadly and saying inclusive innovation, really addressing everyone in the society who is hit by this crisis. I mean, the cutting edge, the platforms, as well as the growing startups are perhaps even profiting from the situation in the digital area, but making sure that the conventional SMEs, the children, university students, young people in general, get the access to inclusive innovation, and it is broadly spread through the society.
Great. Well, I want to thank all of you for contributing to this panel. It's been a really rich discussion. Lots of smaller points, big points. I really like both the way it started by saying, the idea of sort of technology change had been seen often with a negative light, and that has shifted, right? It has really become a much more positive agenda and seen for all the solutions. So we really want to underscore what it takes to really help realize them. And then I think, too, this idea that while we, on the one hand, want sort of a holistic, what do we take to do that, there are differences across different sectors and actors, and we need to tailor a policy mix to be able to address, the needs of different players, whether that's SMEs or those in a more rural area where skills may be more abundant or less abundant, and to have that full potential. And then lastly, I do like this sort of twist on the move fast and make things, and really taking this very seriously as to what sort of combination of things, and that the values and ambition and people are there to sort of help build that enabling environment so that that full potential can be realized. So thank you very much for all these insights. I'm going to turn it back to Galina, who can provide some closing remarks. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Mary, but also thank you, Cecilia, Elizabeth, Vasil, and Peteris. This was fabulous. This was such a rich discussion. And trying to bring the very many dimensions into 2-3 points is absolutely impossible. So what I'll try to do is to at least share with you some of the takeaways that will stay with me after today. And probably the first one is the fact that we, I think, have come to an agreement that embracing the new technologies in ways that contribute to economic development, to prosperity in Europe, but also competitiveness, the market inclusion, the geographical the convergence, these goals, it really varies across countries. And this variance is affected by the availability of digital technologies. Cecilia really nicely put her finger on the issue that we need to understand the drivers of this change. And clearly connectivity and access to affordable ICT is a prerequisite, and Elizabeth mentioned this, and I think Peteris also mentioned this. This needs to be there, but it's not sufficient. So probably this is one of the big takeaways that I take from the discussions. So in addition to access to connectivity, we have to think of the whole digital financial payments, platforms, digital skills, education, talent. Both Vasil and Cecilia really use that angle into the discussion, but also how trust in the online world shapes up the practices and transactions that we carry on now on a daily basis. Perhaps the second point relates to the very time we live today. We are in a pandemic. Look at this. We all are connected from our homes in this event. So here, the experience in Europe, but also probably globally, and Elizabeth and Vasil reminded us a little bit about that, shows that countries that invested in digital transformation strategies, infrastructure, skills early on, that found themselves better prepared to handle shocks. It's obvious, it's trivial, but it's super important. These type of countries are actually able to react and respond quickly to ensure operational continuity of their businesses and the delivery of public services. So, the choice between saving lives or saving livelihoods, they didn't have to make. And I think this is a really big lesson going forward. We didn't speak much at all about it, but I do want to share with you a thought about resilience. What we see is that digital technologies actually has helped build green economies by reducing waste, enabling clean operations across many sectors such as energy, transportation, agriculture. So we need to be focused on how we can use digital technologies for greening the economies of Europe. Again, a really big topic, a topic that I hope we can tackle in some of our next conversations. One more thought, and here Elizabeth reminded me of that, no size fits all. And this is very clear in Europe. There's a little bit of, Cecilia also spoke about the fragmentation. But what is clear to me is that working together, governments, European Commission, international organizations, businesses, big and large, but also civil society, can effectively use digital technologies to tackle even the worst of global challenges, such as the pandemics. And Peteris brought in a nice angle to that and noted the importance to develop innovative solutions that boost resilience, pave the way for a stronger, more resilient and more inclusive recovery going forward. So here, the role of regulation, the role of innovation, of experimentation is super important. And Mary, if I can just close with the final thought, much writes on how the potential of digital technologies is actually realized. So the bank, the World Bank, is using the insights of this analytical work to really inform policy choices and to help countries set their digitalization targets, provide evidence on digitally fit policy mix and ways for closing existing knowledge gaps. I really hope you, the panelists, but also our audience, can also use this report for inspiration and for ideas how to tackle these issues. And I will leave you with the hope that the Europe 4.0 report can help explore possibilities of embracing new technologies in ways that can contribute to the three goals simultaneously: competitiveness, inclusion, and convergence in Europe. With this, I really would like to thank our panelists, but also our viewers, and I hope you will reach out, download the report, and find it insightful. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. Take care, everyone, and stay healthy.